A few decades ago, if you wanted to capture that analog sound, you needed access to analog hardware. I'm talking about big, bulky boxes filled with electronics, tubes, transformers, and other doodads on the inside that add a nice, rich, warm texture to your sounds. I'm fortunate that early on in my engineering career, I was able to work at multiple studios across Toronto, which allowed me to experience the analog world firsthand. I remember running digital sounds from Pro Tools through these huge analog boards, setting faders, turning knobs, sending signals to classic outboard gear, and most importantly, using my ears to make decisions, not just relying on graphs and visuals on a screen. After working that way for a while, going back to mixing in the box felt a little sterile. But working with analog gear wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. It can be clunky, expensive, and limiting. Just one piece of hardware can cost thousands of dollars, and don't even get me started on an entire vocal chain. Plus, if you're living in a tiny space like I used to, good luck finding space for all of that gear. And the workflow? Not exactly efficient when you can only run one sound through one piece of outboard gear at a time. But thankfully, with digital technology, the gap between the analog and digital realms has shrunk. Plugins are now the standard, and for good reason. They're more convenient, they're more affordable, and in many cases they sound just as good as analog gear, if not better, simply due to the increased flexibility that they offer. But I will admit, especially after working on analog gear myself, that it's hard to capture that vibe and workflow in the digital domain. The only thing that's come close is adopting an analog workflow in the box. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. We're going to explore putting together a vocal chain for a melodic rap vocal analog style. And to do that, I'm going to be relying on the best analog model plugins in the game from Slate Digital via their virtual mix rack and a few of the other tools they offer in their complete access bundle. The virtual mix rack offers a suite of plugins that replicates the feeling I had when working on analog hardware. Really, it's got everything that you need to mix high quality vocals, and I'm going to show you how I like to use them in my own sessions in this video right here. Let's begin by first playing the demo vocal that I have here. I'm going to play it in context so you can hear what we're starting with.
On my way to the shadow, taking our risks, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I feel right. Might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like double O. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
Not bad by any means, but obviously pretty raw and bland sounding at the same time. Throughout the rest of this video, I want to take some steps to fix some of the problems that I'm hearing with this vocal, enhance it, and also explore adding some effects towards the end to make it really shine. Before we begin though, I want to point out that I'm using their recent VMR 3.0 update, which introduces a lot of great features to improve the functionality and user friendliness of the plugin. I'm actually going to use one of those new features now, which is the scaling. You can see I'm actually able to resize the plugin, which is handy for a content creator like me, so I can make sure that you guys are able to see this. Now, to start this whole process, I want to look at another new feature which can make things happen a bit more quickly, which is the Discovery Preset Browser. That means we could start with a preset that Slate Digital has available and then expand upon our vocal chain from there. And we can specifically look at the vocal section first and foremost, since we're going to be mixing vocals. You can see there's a whole bunch you can see here, and you can actually expand upon one of them and see exactly what's a part of it, such as this warm vocals template, which has an FGN, an FG116, and a revival. By simply pressing load, it's going to now populate that into my VMR. I can close this window and you can see it here right now. Before I do anything else, let's actually take a listen just to see how this has changed the vocal and the quality of it at the same time.
On my way to the shadow, taking our risks, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I feel right. Might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like double O. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
Now, this isn't bad by any means, but you could tell that in context it sounds a little bit quieter. This is really just a simple gain staging issue that we can resolve by putting on another module such as the trimmer. However, instead of doing this, we can actually take a look at another new feature that the VMR has, which is down here. You can see it has the output gain on each module. This wasn't there before. And what I can now do is actually increase or decrease the volume of each module as I see fit. So in my case, I'm actually going to play this and increase the output gain a little bit and see if I can get this to sit a little bit better before we fully evaluate the quality of this preset.
On my way to the shadow, taking our risks, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I feel right. Might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like double O. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
And just just like that, we already have a forward, clear sounding vocal that sounds more high-end just by using a few of the new features that Slate has implemented as well as the preset here. You can obviously hear how the vocal sounds louder, of course, and I definitely pushed it quite significantly with this output gain move, but also it's tonally different. It's less muddy and it's more high-end. Now you could simply settle for this as is, or if you want, you can continue to tweak your preset by going directly into each module and making adjustments as you see fit. Or if you want, you could take advantage of another new feature they've added, which are the macro controls. You can tell that these two have already been mapped based on the preset that we have here. As I increase the comp, for example, you see the parameters adjusting. Same with the enhance. You can also create your own macro controls by navigating to the macro tab, selecting the plus sign on one of the empty macros, which you see we have 8, and then by clicking the parameter that you want mapped to that macro specifically. What's interesting is you can actually map multiple parameters to a single macro control as well. So for example, if I click this one, I have both of these set up, but what I can do is actually make them invert and do the opposite behavior. So as I increase one, I can decrease the other with a simple tweak of this single macro control. See how the frequency goes up and the gain goes down as I increase it, and vice versa. Now honestly, while this preset is obviously a good starting point, there's still some problems that I'm hearing that I want to address, and I think we could do some more fine tuning and adjusting to get the optimal sound from our vocals. So let's basically treat this like we're going back to the start. I'm actually going to bypass all of these modules and I'm going to start from scratch, and I may reintroduce them later or even swap one out for another as I see fit. Now to begin, if I solo the vocal and you pay attention, you're going to actually hear that there's some noise in between these gaps of the vocal performance, particularly some headphone bleed and maybe some other background noise taking place. I'm going to play it and pay attention.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel, all bet.
You hear what I'm talking about. Now, because of that, I want to start this vocal chain out with a gate. And for that, I'm going to rely on the FG dynamics. My main goal is going to be to use the gate specifically to reduce the amount of headphone bleed you hear happening in between those pauses in the vocal performance.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel, all bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel, all bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
That's already sounding a lot better, a lot tighter, and obviously you can hear how it's really clamping down on those pauses, reducing the audibility of that headphone bleed, and ultimately getting us closer to a more professional sounding result. And while this is addressing the first problem of treating noise, I can also hear another problem, which is sibilance and harshness popping up, especially around those S's, those F's, those CH type of sounds. So I'm going to want to do something to treat them, and I'm specifically going to be using the FGDS 902. Now as I do this, I'm going to enable the touch listen so I can really hear the frequency that we're focusing on. So let's play this and see if we can treat that harsh sibilance.
On my way to the shuttle, take and light shines up the tunnel, all bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel.
So this is good. It's just gently treating those S's, and it's not too heavy-handed, and that's important because de-essing in particular can be very destructive sometimes. It can really affect the sound and tonality of a vocal, so you don't want to overdo it. And in my case, it's actually even letting through a couple of S's, but most of the time it's clamping down and treating them. And to be fair, I could also have not used either of these two processes and just done some manual editing and some manual clip gain to treat them, but treating them this way with the plugins is just much more efficient from a time perspective. It can take care of 90% of the work, and if there's still some lingering issues, I can go in and do a manual cleanup on my own after the fact. Now, moving on from these two corrective processes, I'm actually going to put this EQ back in, the FGN British-inspired EQ here. And while I think it's doing some good stuff, I also think it's a little bit too heavy-handed, specifically this low cut here. I think it's really thinning out the vocal, which is ultimately giving us that high-end sound, but I think it's just a little bit too much. It's making the vocal lack that lower-end presence that it should have. So for that reason, I'm going to adjust some of these settings and try to get it closer to where I want it to be, which is not so thinned out. Here we go.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
Overall, this is definitely sounding better. The main thing I did here was just backing off on the low cut and the low reduction here on the shelf. I did back off a little bit on the high end here, but I still preserved this high end boost because I really like that shininess and that airiness that we're getting as a result of using this EQ. And I always use EQ early on in my process after doing some corrections like this. Now, tonally, the vocal's really starting to come together with a brighter, more high end type of sound. However, it could be inconsistent at times, with some phrases really poking out and others buried. For that reason, I think it's worth bringing a compressor into the mix to even things out and ultimately bring the vocal more forward overall. And I think because I have access to a variety of character compressors through the VMR that I should do something called serial compression. This is where you stack multiple compressors together with lighter settings rather than having one compressor cranked and working really hard. Not only will this sound a bit more gentle and potentially musical overall, but it'll also add the character of both compressors that I end up using, which I think could be a benefit in this track. For the first compressor, I want to use something that is highly tweakable, something that has access to the attack, the release, and other settings, and for that I'm going to use the FG Stress. Now my goal with this compressor is going to be to work gently, of course, but also really catch those loudest peaks that pop through the mix. So if I actually look at the waveform, for example, you can see that there's some specific peaking that is happening. It's not clipping or anything like that, but it obviously is significantly louder than some of these quieter moments. So I want to ultimately use this as the first step to bridge the gap between them. So just to get some starter settings going, I'm going to set the slowest attack time possible and the fastest release time possible. I'm going to use a 2-to-1 ratio, which should be pretty gentle. And then I'm going to play with the input and output, and I might reevaluate the attack and release, of course, as I do this to ultimately get some gain reduction, aiming for somewhere between 2 and 3, maybe as high as 4 at times, but really trying to stick to this 3 or less amount of gain reduction. So let's see what we got.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
Now, I'm not going to lie, it's definitely louder, especially when I bypass and put it in. However, you can hear some of that character, some of that warmth that it's bringing in at the same time. If you're really concerned with loudness and loudness bias, it's a good time to use that extra new feature of the output gain, or even just adjusting the output gain on your end. But overall, I like what this is doing, and you can see that it's working a little bit harder during some times than others. Certain peaks, certain phrases, it's really clamping down 2, 3, maybe even 4 dB, and others it's barely even tickling 1. So obviously, this is the first step that I want to take, but now I want to follow it up with the second compressor, and for that, I'm going to use another optical compressor here, which is going to be the FG2A. Now you can see that this compressor looks a little bit different from the one that we just used, being that it only has 2 key parameters, the peak reduction and the gain. Of course, you could set a few other things here as Slate has added a bit more functionality, but these are the main 2 that we're going to focus on. And I like using optical compressors like this one in particular because they're very simple to use, there's not a lot to tweak, and they naturally have certain settings that I find lend themselves well to vocals. Specifically, they have a slower attack time, a slower release time, which produces a smoother result. Usually believe the ratio is fixed somewhere around 4:1, although again, it kind of depends on which one you're using. And similar to before, because I am stacking these compressors together, I want to try to get a modest amount of gain reduction, 1 or 2 dB on average, I would say. So let's obviously set this up. I'm going to first start by setting the peak reduction and then utilizing the gain after the fact to try to make up for what I'm losing, if anything. Here we go.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00.
It's very subtle but impressive what this is doing. You can hear how it's really producing this consistent forward vocal sound. The tone is awesome, it's warm, and really we're just benefiting from both of these compressors and the character that they add. I like these two, of course, but there's tons of other compressors you can use within the VMR. I just happen to gravitate towards these two more often than not, and you can hopefully hear how they're making the vocal sound more forward, more consistent, and ultimately achieving everything I talked about before we entered this section. But a key problem with compression sometimes is while it is making things consistent, sometimes it exaggerates certain frequency pockets and makes them poke out a little bit more. It ultimately changes the tonal balance. Just like I said, it's making things warmer, but if you're paying attention to the high end, it is producing a little bit of harshness that I think we should treat a little bit further. And for that reason, I'm going to be using another EQ, this one being the FGS, to hopefully quell some of that higher end harshness that I hear building up as a result of everything we've just done. So with that in mind, I'm really going to focus on using the two higher end bands, or maybe just one of them, we'll see, to ultimately treat some of these problematic areas. Here we go.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope.
I could live with that. I think it's cleaning things up a little bit, but in a very subtle way where you don't really notice it as much, which is a good thing. So now just for a little bit of housekeeping, I'm going to remove this FG116 compressor because we obviously compressed earlier in the process, and I don't think we need to do that again. However, I really liked what this Revival plugin was doing earlier when we were just listening to the preset on its own. So I do want to preserve this, but I probably want to make some adjustments to it. So I'm going to simply re-enable it and listen to it in real time. I'm also going to reset our output gain since we don't really need that anymore, at least for now. And let's just play this and see what adjustments I can make and if it sounds appropriate.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel.
It's impressive what this plugin does. It sounds really good. It's really emulating the sound of transformers and tubes and some of the electronics that I mentioned in the intro of this video. And obviously I walked back on some of these settings just a little bit. And to be fair, I could have used the macro control. I'm just still adjusting to the fact that we have access to that now. But I've tamed things a bit so that way it's not too overemphasized, but still enhancing what's there. So right now, before I even continue with the reverb and the effects, let me bypass this whole vocal chain and put it in. Let's see what it sounds like.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel.
Now that's pretty impressive, but hold on, don't click away just yet. We're gonna add some reverb. I'm gonna show you how to do that, and we're gonna add some delay as well. And then at the very end, we're gonna do a whole comparison with everything in and out of context, so you're gonna get the full picture of what we just did. I've already set up a bus here for my reverb, and I've put an instance of the Verb Suite Classics on there with the default setting. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I am sending my original chorus here via a send to this location. With this in place, I can now actually adjust my reverb. And to start, I like to use presets once again, at least just to get things going. I'm gonna navigate to the vocal section, and I'm gonna hit the CLA plate, which is one that I tend to gravitate towards. Let's quickly just play this track and hear what it sounds like as is before we tweak anything further.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel.
Now this is a cool starting point, but I think it's a little bit messy and needs to be cleaned up a little bit and tailored to this vocal specifically. Now the first thing that I want to adjust, and this is with reverb in general, is going to be the pre-delay and the decay time. I want to set it up so that it mirrors the tempo that I have, which right now is 98 BPM. We can use a reverb time calculator to figure out exactly what these settings should be with our tempo in mind, and you can simply just search online reverb time calculator and a result will pop up that should help you for free. Now I'm aiming for a large room type of reverb sound, and right now the pre-delay is set way longer than it should be for that in mind. So I'm going to therefore drop this down closer to about 38 milliseconds, which again is set for my tempo. From there on, I want to adjust my decay setting. And even though it's listing a percentage here, you can see the time is listed right here, which is not too far off from where I need it to be. In my case, I'm going to aim for it to be around 2.41 seconds, which should be roughly equivalent to 1 bar with this tempo in mind. Now, as a final step, I'm going to play this and then adjust my EQ settings in context so I can make the right choices. I did find that there seemed to be a lot of low end, and that makes sense because it's being boosted here. I'm probably going to reduce that and maybe adjust the other ones as well to produce a much cleaner reverb sound that complements the vocal. Here we go.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
That sounds significantly better so far. I do think there's still a little bit too much reverb present, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, but you can see how I've made some EQ adjustments that's really cleaned it up, removing a lot of lows, removing some of the highs, keeping it more focused on the mids, supporting the vocal, rather than muddying things up with too much low end or too much high end. But like I said, the reverb's getting in the way of the vocal a little bit, and this is an opportunity to use the VMR once again, as well as another new feature that it's introduced. As of the VMR 3.0 update, you can see now that there is actually a key input and sidechain capability built into the VMR. That means I can essentially use sidechain compression and other sidechain processes within the plugin itself. To do that, I'm going to first just set up a bus that receives a signal from the vocal, and then I'm going to put on a compressor, preferably one that is highly adaptive, something that I could sculpt in order to prioritize that vocal sound over the reverb. In this case, I'm going to use the FG401. Now, the first thing we've got to do is set the sidechain input to external, which is going to recognize that key input we just set. From here, we could dial in a couple of quick settings and then get our signal going. So I'm going to dial a fast attack, a fast release, and I'm going to leave this at a 2:1 ratio for now and just play it and bring down my threshold. As I do this, you're going to see some gain reduction taking place, which should be indicative of the vocal playing and therefore causing the compressor to reduce and make room for that dry vocal on the reverb. Let's do that, and then we'll talk about adjusting the parameters after.
On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shuttle, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
So you can obviously hear, in this case, every time the vocal is being performed, it's causing this compressor to react and reduce the plate reverb by about 3 dB on average. I did slow down the release a little bit so that it could kind of smooth things out, but overall I think this is working. I do think that there's still a little bit too much presence from the reverb as a whole, however, so what I'm going to do is play it one more time and then just dial back the makeup gain here, since this is just real easy right here. Alternatively, you could of course use the output gain, or you could even use a trimmer module if you prefer that. But let's just do it here with the makeup gain for simplicity.
On my way to the shuttle, Taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel.
That's sounding much better and much more appropriate at the same time. It's not so overwhelming and overbearing. You're still able to get that presence and the benefit of the reverb, but without it becoming just too overwhelming in the mix, which is exactly what I'm after. But that being said, let's switch gears now and talk about delay. Now, just like before, I've set up a parallel track or a bus or a send, whatever you want to call it. I have everything set up here and it's all coming out of this bus that you see on my chorus. And I've actually taken this a step further and automated certain phrases to be thrown to this delay. So only the end phrase or end word of each bar is essentially going to be echoed and repeated. And I am aiming to have something like a quarter note repeated pattern here to fill in the gaps that we have during the vocal performance. That'll also help cover up any potential noise that we had that maybe didn't get treated, and also just add a really nice, unique texture to the vocal as a whole. So circling back to the medium delay, I'm going to use the repeater plugin, which again is also a part of Slate Digital's complete access bundle. And just like before, I am going to rely on a preset first and foremost and make some adjustments from there. So by clicking here, I'm able to choose a preset, and I like the sound of this one, colorful mono vox delay. I'm going to just click it. I'll close this window for now, and we can actually see what this sounds like with the delay throws that I've created.
On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00.
Now this is a good starting point, but just like the other situations, I think we can make a couple of adjustments to just improve this and make it a little bit more fluid with our track specifically. First of all, I want to probably just increase the overall level of the output because I think that the delay just sounds really quiet in the background here, and this is just a simple way to bring everything up at the same time.
On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel.
So just that alone is already making a pretty significant difference. But the next thing I want to do is adjust the delay model here. You can see it's currently set to new radio, but if I click it, you can see a whole bunch of other presets that we can use. Overall, these will each impart its own unique texture and character to the delay, so I want to just cycle through a few of them and see what they sound like and maybe land on one that's a little bit more applicable, or maybe the preset that we're using is perfectly fine. Let's find out.
On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
So I've settled on this one here, Digital 42X2. Obviously, I didn't go through every single one available, but this one stood out to me specifically because it had this nice filtered, darker type of texture and character that's different from the others that we auditioned so far. So now let's do a final comparison here. I'm going to mute the vocal chain and I'm going to mute the effects. We're going to hear it dry in context, and I'm going to put everything back in. We can obviously evaluate how much progress we've made throughout this video.
On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines up the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine. On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. On my way to the shadow, taking no risk, no buckle. If something goes wrong, I fear I might not make it, but I did try. At the end, light shines at the tunnel. All bets on me like 00. Haven't lost my hope. If it rains like this, I know the sun gon' shine.
Quite the impressive difference, as you can tell. I think Slate Digital has made a lot of great improvements to the virtual mix rack as a whole with this recent 3.0 update, and you can really hear how their plugins and effects enhance the vocal as a whole. I honestly encourage you to check out these plugins if you haven't already, and everything that I showed you is available in Slate Digital's Complete Access bundle, and that not only includes plugins from Slate Digital, but also solid state Logic. If you're not convinced yet, you can do a free 30-day trial to evaluate these plugins on your own, and I'll leave a link down in the description below for you to do that. Now, if you want to see another review style video I did on Slate Digital's ML1 microphone, I'm going to leave a link to that right here. Watch that video next. If you got value out of the video, please smash that like button, and of course subscribe if you're new to see more mixing tips in the future. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I look forward to helping y'all again soon. Peace.